So after the Los Angeles Lakers won the championship and LeBron James won his 4th ring and 4th Finals MVP, we could not even make it to the end of the game before the argument started coming back up. And I don't even have to say what argument it is because you already know. But I'll say it anyway. The argument came up once again that LeBron James is the greatest basketball player to ever walk the earth. And while I haven't really been vocal on who I think is the GOAT on this channel, I've been vocal about it on Twitter in the past. But notice how I said in the past. Because over time I started to realize that everybody is gonna have a different opinion. And no matter what, you'll probably never change that opinion. This is what makes it so difficult for some people to judge the greatness of these players. Because a lot of arguments you see now, especially on ESPN or other sports networks from guys like Ryan Hollins, Kendrick Perkins, or Nick Wright, the arguments that these guys make are often so biased that their goal is actually to tear down another player in order to make their argument. Now, I understand that these guys are the extreme, but they still have a spot on popular sports talk shows, so that's why I felt it was important to include them. But with all that being said, with all the different things that can factor into this argument, you will very quickly see why debating about the GOAT is just dumb and a good way to waste your time. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to look at all the different factors that can prevent players from being accurately compared to one another, and we're going to be talking about why having GOAT debates is stupid. But before we begin, if you're new here, I'm Double D. I'm a huge basketball fan and I make NBA videos here on YouTube. So if you're also an NBA fan, or just a basketball fan in general, feel free to hit the sub button, and click the bell to be notified when I upload more videos just like this one. Also, according to YouTube analytics, around 84% of you guys that watch my videos are still not subscribed, and so I would really appreciate that. Alright, let's get into the video. So right away, for me the biggest problems with even having this debate in the first place is just how many variables you have to consider that sometimes these players have absolutely no control over. Like what era they played in, for example. You also have the problem that people just have natural biases that typically tend to lean towards certain players. And you have the problem of misinformation or cherry-picked arguments. We'll go through each of these individually, starting with the eras. Now, I've seen the perfect example of this floating around recently. It's the take that Steph Curry is a better playoff performer than Kobe Bryant. Now, you guys know how much I love Steph. But this is just insane, for two reasons. One is the fact that the eras play a major part in why their numbers are what they are. For one, Kobe Bryant played out a majority of his prime in the slowest pace era in the modern NBA. During Kobe Bryant's prime, which I would consider to be from 2000 to 2013, the average number of possessions per game was 91.6, and the average point total was 97.4 points. Compared to Steph Curry's prime, which I would consider to be from 2013 until now, the average number of possessions is 96.8, and the average number of points scored is 105.5. So you can see where the difference in eras played a factor here. And that's because the game is just so much different than it was even 10 years ago. Take a look at the spacing Kobe Bryant was dealing with back in 2009, compared to the spacing today. Like, it's completely different, and guys have the space to do pretty much whatever they want now. And you can also say the popularization of the three-point shot is a cause of that. You also need to consider the fact that Kobe Bryant played in Phil Jackson's triangle offense for the vast majority of his career, which isn't as reliant on guards playmaking. And as soon as D'Antoni took over the Lakers, you could see there was a noticeable increase in his assists per game because the system was different. Kobe was also a way better defender than Steph, I cannot overstate that. But you can very quickly see how this argument starts to look laughable once you actually take a look at the context. It's barely even an argument. And it's a product of the eras they played in, and that's why it's such a huge factor in this conversation. But the one thing I want to talk about next, which is probably one of the ones that I hate the most, especially in the media, is noticeable bias towards certain players. This, in my opinion, defeats any purpose of having a debate, because bias will always work over logic or facts. As we see from people on both sides of the MJ versus LeBron argument. We see Jordan fans say things like LeBron couldn't play in the 90s, and we see LeBron fans say things like Jordan's competition was terrible, that's why he dominated. Now, I don't agree with either of these takes. The second one is obvious because Jordan consistently played against all-time great talent such as Larry Bird, Kareem, Magic, Isaiah Thomas, Gary Payton, Shaq, and the list goes on. But the first one is an argument that I could see someone making, but I just don't think it makes sense. LeBron, or really any superstar or all-time great player, can play in any era, because they would know how to adjust and still be great. So I don't agree with either of those. But you can see my point. Those are arguments that people constantly use that have no way to back them up. It's literally just bias taking over the argument. If you want to say that LeBron has played tougher teams, then you could have an argument, but to just completely disregard the other man's competition, like, what does that even prove or accomplish? So that's the problem I have with people letting their bias get in the way of having a real debate with things that can actually be backed up. But the last thing I wanted to talk about is when people do use things to back up their argument, like stats for example, but they either don't even know what they're looking at, or they use them incorrectly or without looking deeper, like I showed with the Kobe and Curry comparison earlier. Two specific things that I thought about immediately were takes from both OSN and Jimmy High Roller. Now, OSN is known to have questionable takes, like, I think we're on the same page there. But the take from Jimmy is just blatantly bad. And the problem is that he has such a huge fan base that a lot of people are gonna take it and run with it, even though it's a terrible argument. But let's start with OSN. Now, OSN made a video about 2 years ago detailing his top 10 players of all time, at which point he reveals that he put Kobe Bryant at number 7 all time, which I personally have no problem with. That's your opinion, and as long as it's not blatantly bad, like, oh, Kobe sucks, he's not top 20, like, then I would have a problem. But let's just see the reasoning behind having Kobe where he is.
Player efficiency rating, a very important stat, PER. Kobe's player efficiency rating is not even in the top 10. Kobe is not efficient at all, and as we start to get into these guys all the way at the top, these are the most efficient basketball players of all time.
Okay, so here's the problem. Kobe being all the way down here in PER doesn't mean that he wasn't as efficient as some of these other guys. If PER is one of your only arguments against Kobe, then why isn't Steph Curry on your list? PER, while it's named the player efficiency rating, it barely has anything to do with shooting efficiency at all. We can see the official definition of PER here, defined as a per-minute rating developed by ESPN.com columnist John Hollinger. In John's own words, the PER sums up all a player's positive accomplishments, subtracts the negative accomplishments, and returns a per-minute rating of a player's performance. Which means that pace would inevitably be factored into it. And if we look at the rest of the list, we would see that, oh, Bob Pettit and Neil Johnston are up here. Two guys that both played in an extremely fast-paced league back in the 50s. Now, there's no pace statistic for this era, but I don't think there needs to be one because of these other numbers. Teams averaged around 100 points in this era, but they sometimes averaged over 70 rebounds per game. For comparison, for the last 30 seasons in the NBA, the highest number of average rebounds per game was the 2018-19 season at 45.2 rebounds per game. So that just shows you how many possessions there were per game. It's insane, which makes sense why they're up here, because a higher pace will allow you to have a higher PER by definition, because remember, it's a per minute rating. The second take I want to talk about is from Jimmy, and I have no problem with Jimmy. I watch almost all his videos and they're great. But this video that he just uploaded titled "This Changes Nothing," which he talks about LeBron winning his 4th ring. But in that video, he made a hilariously bad take, then backed it up with, you'll see.
But even in his 10th finals appearance, LeBron is just as dominant as ever, putting up numbers that even Anthony Davis can't quite keep up with. In fact, two narratives that are circulating at the moment are that Anthony Davis is playing outstanding defense in comparison to LeBron, and that Anthony Davis is carrying the Lakers down the stretch. Both of these narratives being painfully incorrect. LeBron not only has a higher defensive rating than Anthony Davis in the finals, LeBron has scored 3 times as many points in the 4th quarter as Anthony Davis so far in this series.
Okay, bro. So here's the thing. I honestly hope you're not trying to make the case that LeBron James is a better defender than Anthony Davis, because he's not, considering the rim protection, his pick and roll defense, and just his overall presence both in the paint and sometimes on the perimeter, like things that sometimes don't show up on stat sheets. Also the steals and blocks. But then you try to back it up by saying LeBron has a higher defensive rating than Anthony Davis. Now, this is just... Okay, so at first I thought you just color-coded the wrong numbers, because I'll admit, I've done that before. But then you actually said it. This is very problematic. Because not only is it not accurate to compare two players using only defensive rating, but the lower your defensive rating is, statistically, the better you are on defense. Now, I don't mean to sound condescending here, but for someone who only makes content on basketball and stats specifically, I feel like that's something that you should know. Now, the problem is that he has a massive fan base. This video right now has 897,000 views, which means that a lot of people have seen this, and they may end up rolling with a take that is blatantly false and badly researched. But that's a problem I've been seeing specifically with advanced stats in the last few years, is people using them while not having a clear understanding of what they're even looking at. And that's a problem especially if you're using it in an argument. But overall, the concept of these arguments is still just never gonna go away, because people will continue having these debates, and they'll continue coming out of them with no progress made towards convincing the other person to believe the same take as you. Because this goes back to what I said earlier, is that people have biases. And part of that is to do with eras. Because if someone started watching basketball today, they might say LeBron is the GOAT. If they started watching basketball in the 2000s, they might think Jordan or Kobe. 90s, Jordan. 80s, Magic or Bird. 70s, Kareem. 60s, Bill Russell. Like, that's something that you will probably never be able to change, and that's just how it is. So that, along with everything that I just talked about, is why having a GOAT debate is stupid, and why I stopped doing it a long time ago. But with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you're new, hit the bell to be notified when I upload, comment down below what you want to see next, and as always, I'll see you guys on the next one.